Hi, everyone. My name is Kevin Gallen, and I'm the Assistant Director of Research Development at the Franco Family Institute for the Liberal Arts and the Public Good. I'm really excited to be with you all today here and joined by Suzanne DiGiulio and Jenny Irons from the William T. Grant Foundation. This is our second webinar of the year, hoping to connect interested faculty with resources and potential ideas for generating, outside grant applications and getting those exciting projects that you're working on off the ground. So I will say at the top that I'm here to answer any questions that you may have about your individual research, whether it's a specific proposal for the William T. Grant Foundation after this exciting presentation, or anything else that you're working on. I'm here as a resource. I think that also speaks for Suzanne over in Foundation Relations. But with that said, I wanted to turn over the rest of our presentation to Jenny, who's very generously offered to share some of her time and expertise with us. Jenny, if you wanted to give sort of a quick introduction of who
Sure.
you are, and then we can segue directly into the presentation.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thanks for having me today. I'm happy to do this. I'm Jenny Irons. I'm a senior program officer at the William T. Grant Foundation, where I've been for almost 7.5 years now. What feels like a prior life, I was an associate professor of sociology at Hamilton College. I left academia and did a few other things before landing at the foundation. So it's been a real joy to be here, to be able to do the work that we do and to work with so many wonderful scholars doing amazing work. One of those folks, Anna Haskins, is on the faculty there at Notre Dame, and it was a pleasure getting to know her when she was a William T. Grant scholar. Excuse me. So Kevin asked me to talk about 10 to 15 minutes today. So this is going to be a pretty high level overview of our funding interests and opportunities. And I'll also highlight some of the resources we have for potential applicants and emphasize a couple of things that you all want to keep in mind as you're developing proposals for the foundation, especially in this particularly tricky and difficult funding climate. So I'll just start by highlighting that the foundation was founded in 1936. We have always funded research. There's been a commitment to understanding human behavior through research, and then I'll mention in a timely way that one of the folks we funded many years ago was Jane Goodall and her work to understand human behavior. These days, our focus is on funding research to improve the lives of young people ages 5 to 25 in the United States. We do that through two focus areas, which I'll talk about in a minute, but I really do want to emphasize that those parameters are very strict, that our mission is focused on funding research on young people ages 5 to 25 in the United States, and that is a very tight parameter that we maintain. Before I get into talking about our focus areas, I do want to say something about the funding climate. As you all know, that federal funding has been not entirely decimated, but made incredibly difficult. Many of our grantees have lost their funding, many others as well. The climate is very difficult for folks working in higher education, doing scientific research right now. And we are feeling that at the William T. Grant Foundation. We've seen a tremendous increase in our volume of applications. Our applications for our major grants program, which is our largest program, nearly tripled in May, and it more than tripled in August. We saw a tripling in the number of applications for the William T. Grant Scholars Program. And then a few weeks ago, we received applications for our Institutional Challenge Grant Program. And I mean, these are very burdensome applications, burdensome proposals to put together. And whereas in past years, we've received anywhere from 13 to 27, we received 62 this year. So we are seeing a tremendous increase in the number of applications we receive. We also, as a foundation, remain committed to funding the work we fund that examines ways to reduce inequality. And I'll talk about that more in a minute, and to use research evidence, something that's also under attack in this time. And I share this slide just to highlight this statement from our president, Adam Gamron, about our commitment to remaining steadfast to our mission in this very turbulent and difficult funding climate. So let me talk a little bit about our two major focus areas. In a minute, I'll tell you about our three main grant programs. And for any funding you apply to at the foundation, it has to be a fit with one of our two main focus areas. Most of the applications we receive come in applying to our Reducing Inequality initiative. And in that initiative, we seek to fund studies that examine ways to reduce inequality for young people. We fund descriptive studies that examine the mechanisms through which programs, practices, or policies might reduce inequality. We fund intervention studies. We fund quantitative work, qualitative work, mixed methods work. What's important for us is that the applications are a fit with this focus on reducing inequality, and the work really does need to be focused on and centering a strategy or a lever to reduce inequality. We do not fund work that examines inequality in order to uncover potential strategies, but the work really does need to be focused on strategies to reduce inequality. Most of the work we fund examines ways to reduce inequalities in terms of academic outcomes, behavioral outcomes, social outcomes, or economic outcomes. And we also have priority dimensions of inequality that we focus on. We fund research that examines ways to reduce inequalities by economic standing, race or ethnicity, immigrant origin, language minority status, which I don't have listed because I think of that as related very tightly to immigrant origin, and sexual or gender minority status. And by that, we mean research that seeks ways to improve outcomes for LGBTQ youth. As a research funder, we think research matters. So we also have a portfolio that supports work that examines ways to improve the use of research evidence by decision makers in youth serving systems. One of the things I want to underscore here, because I will say a lot of the applications that come in for this focus area are not a fit, and it's often because people are applying to study research use by what you might call frontline practitioners, so teachers, caseworkers, et cetera, but we are interested in funding ways to improve the use of research evidence by decision makers in youth serving systems, so mid-level managers, curriculum folks, people who are really making decisions about what happens. And keep in mind that this is funding work to examine ways to improve the use of research evidence, so bodies of literature, bodies of research, not data. So I want to highlight those two focus areas and draw your attention to, through these QR codes, a couple of blog posts that we have written to help potential applicants evaluate whether or not their work might be a fit. So you can find these blog posts on our website. They both are titled something like, "Is it a fit?" And they try to walk you through ways to think about your own work and whether or not it might be a fit with one of our two focus areas. I'll talk now about our three major funding opportunities. Our largest grant program, as I mentioned earlier, is our major grants program. We have typically had 3 deadlines per year for this grant program. There is a chance that we might go back down to 2 deadlines next year, which will be announced in late November. This is something the Spencer Foundation has also done. I mean, what's happened as the volume has increased for private funders is we're trying to think about ways to shift our strategies, but also to ensure that everyone who applies gets a fair and thorough review. So our next deadline is January 7th. I don't have the date on there, but it is January 7th. And for the major grants program, the first stage of application is a 5-page letter of inquiry, which is just a mini proposal. The amount you can ask for these grants ranges anywhere from up to $600,000 for reducing inequality and up to $1 million for studies that examine ways to improve the use of research evidence. These grants last anywhere from 2 to 4 years. And they go through an internal and external review process. It's quite thorough. And if we have time, I can talk a little bit with you and show you an illustration about how that happens. But these are grants to fund research studies. We also have, in addition to the major grants program, smaller officers research awards, which are awards of $50,000 or less. The decisions about those happen more quickly, so in like an 8 to 10 week timeframe, whereas decisions about major grants take anywhere from 10 to 15 months because they have to go through a very rigorous review process and ultimately board approval. The second program I'll mention is our career development program. It's the William T. Grant Scholars Program. Deadlines for this program are always once a year in early July. We recently increased the amount of this award to $425,000. We are also very hopeful that due to co-funding, we might be able to fund up to 6 scholars next year. That is TBD currently. But what's great about this award is it is a career development award. Whereas major grants are an investment in a study, this is the investment in the career of promising scholars to both undertake research, but also to stretch their expertise in particular ways, substantive or methodological. This program requires an entire proposal up front, as well as letters of support from both advisors and mentors. This application is quite extensive, and it's something that people need to be thinking about in advance. You're eligible if you're 7 years out from your terminal degree in your field. And the final grant I'll mention is the Institutional Challenge Grant Program. I work most closely with the Major Grants Program on reducing inequality and the Institutional Challenge Grant Program. Also, as I mentioned before, a very heavy lift for this application because it is a partnership application between universities and nonprofits to both undertake research to reduce inequality among young people served by a nonprofit or public agency, to improve the capacity of nonprofits and public agencies to use research evidence, and to challenge universities to undertake institutional change to better support, reward, and incentivize community engaged research. And so this award initially is $650,000 for 3 years with a 2-year continuation period. This is our only grant program where applications don't go out for external review. It is entirely reviewed entirely by our selection committee, and you can see who those folks are online. This year, because we had so many applications come in and so many of them were very strong, we have done what we did in our scholars program and brought on a number of folks to help us with reviews for the year. And so you can see we've expanded our selection committee in very exciting ways for this year. They are listed on our website. I will just put this up there very quickly. I'm not going to go through all of these, but one of the things I like to highlight for people is the kinds of questions people ask in the research we funded. You can see you're all, established researchers. You've had methodological training. Some of these are questions that are answered through quantitative approaches, both descriptive and causal. And then there are questions here, the second one in particular, that is a qualitative study that's really thinking about youth participatory action research. And the final one here is an example of the kinds of questions someone's asking in our use of research evidence portfolio. Oh, excuse me, itchy nose. I just want to highlight too some of the awards we've funded in our scholars program. We funded Ann Owens to do some work where she's asking the research question you see here, but also was thinking about how to expand her expertise in doing policy analysis and thinking about housing policy in particular. Terrence Green, a researcher at the University of Texas, Austin, was also expanding his expertise in policy analysis, but as someone who is trained as a qualitative scholar, wanted to use quantitative methods to enhance his research agenda, so he used his time to do that. John T. Owens expanded her expertise in a substantive area, but also in thinking about new kinds of methods. And then finally, Natasha Quadlin, a quantitatively trained scholar who is using her awards to expand her expertise in qualitative methods. I just want to give you some application tips to share things. I mean, one of the things we always tell people when we give these presentations is we have a lot of resources on our website. I know it can be overwhelming. What I'm trying to do with this presentation today is highlight some of the most important resources you can look at. But in addition to the application guidance, you want to take advantage of everything we offer. And I'll show you one of our strongest resources in a minute is the annotated proposals we have. Another thing I want to point out, it's really important, especially with that 5-page letter of inquiry, if you apply for our major grants program, to provide enough detail for reviewers at the internal stage to evaluate the rigor and appropriateness of your methods. This is a 5-page letter of inquiry. Inevitably, if I see a letter of inquiry that is less than 5 pages, 4 pages, 4.5 pages, it's probably missing some key details. So when you're talking about your research design, you want to say things like how many people will be in your sample? What's the rationale for how many people are in your sample? I know 5 pages is not a lot, but you need to provide enough information that we can evaluate and make a decision about whether or not to invite a full proposal. This third point is, it seems obvious, but when you're writing a proposal for us or anyone else, you don't want your reader making inferences, right? So you want to be really clear throughout your proposal about how it's a fit with our interest in reducing inequality. So I was just reading an application earlier where the front part of it talked about the importance of reducing inequality by race, but then in the analysis, nothing about race showed up. And so there's a big mismatch there that you don't really have a through line in discussing why your work is a fit. And again, because you're heavily embedded in the work that you're doing, you sometimes can forget to spell things out. But you really want to do that whether you're submitting a letter of inquiry or full proposal. You don't want your reader to make inferences because they could make the wrong ones. And speaking to that, I always encourage people to have other people read your proposal, whether it's somebody like Kevin or Suzanne, maybe not an expert in your area, but someone who can understand the work you're describing and say, hey, this doesn't make sense. You've got some holes there. This is where you need to fill in. Another thing people do, I will say, a mistake people make with that 5-page letter of inquiry is they will take up a whole page telling us about the strength of your team. That's not the place to do that. You want to do it in the budget justification and any other supplementary materials you submit at different stages, but don't use your precious proposal narrative space to talk about things you can talk about in other stages of the application. One thing folks always ask too is, should applicants reach out to us before they submit a letter of inquiry, a full proposal, et cetera? For the most part, unfortunately, we cannot meet with applicants ahead of time. We just, I mean, even in the olden days, back in January 2025, we couldn't handle the volume. And now we especially can't. So we really hope that all the resources we provide can help you think about whether or not your work is a fit. This QR code just links to our website, so don't worry if I'm skipping over this quickly, but I just want to underscore that a good thing to look at are our annual digest and blog posts that we publish, because we are often, as staff, writing essays or asking our grantees to write essays that we think of as our curriculum. It's sort of like, what do we want applicants to be thinking about? What do we want this field of researchers to be thinking about? So those are good things to check out. I think here this links to an essay I wrote, and I will flag this because Notre Dame has a lot of people doing this really great work. We'd love to see more applications from folks thinking about how social movements can be used to shift power hierarchies and ways that can change outcomes for young people. This is the resource I really want to draw your attention to. Across all of our grant programs, we have examples of annotated excerpts of proposals. I believe this QR code links to the page that shows you different excerpts of scholars' proposals that have been annotated. And the reason why this annotation is important is you see these little kind of purplish boxes here is not only is it showing you excerpts of successful proposals, but it's also giving you insight into what reviewers think about, the way staff read things, to try to give you very clear and concrete examples for what we mean when we ask for certain things. So I encourage you to check those out. I encourage you to check out webinars. We try to do them once a year for all of our grant programs. And I think I will stop there, Kevin, if that's okay. And if people want to talk about the review process at any point, I'm happy to do that. I feel like the most important part of conversations like this is being able to answer the questions you have. So I want to make sure we have time for that.
Absolutely. Jenny, that was really great, really efficient and clear. I really appreciate it. If you'd be willing to share that slide deck and some of those links
Sure.
to the resources, I can also circulate that out to
Yeah.
everyone who's here and the other people who've registered. I want to give folks some time to think up some specific questions. If one of them is about the multi-stage review process, we could talk about that. One thing I want to say right out the gate is, Jenny has explained a couple times that these applications can be sophisticated. They can have a lot of pieces to them. One thing I want to make very clear, and I'll speak for Foundation Relations and Notre Dame Research and some of the other offices on campus, that's our job, is to help you with that. So if you're sitting there looking and thinking, oh my God, this application seems so complicated and really huge and a huge time sink on top of research and teaching and all the other things, one of your first phone calls or emails should be to either me, to Suzanne. Colleen is also on the call. Other folks, we are here to support that. We can help drafting and redrafting the proposal, scoping the budget, just talking about what the deliverables and the outcomes might be. Basically, when you hit our pipeline, you get a nice little bubble wrapping of support from lots of different offices on campus, and we're excited to do that work. And we're looking for emails and to keep our own calendars busy. So if you are thinking about this, even at a provisional idea, reach out. We'd be happy to start that conversation on our end.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's sort of where I think people like Suzanne and I can hop into this process. One question that I was thinking about, and I think might cross over with some other things that people were thinking, is, when I'm reviewing proposals, I'm always thinking about what are the deliverables at the end of this, to use sort of a businessy term. Things like an academic monograph or academic, peer-reviewed papers, those are clear. But can you talk about, like, what are some of the outcomes or the actual sort of material, tangible things that you see at the end of, especially the major grants and maybe the institutional
Yeah.
challenge grants?
So as a research funder, our expectation across all of the grant programs is the primary deliverable, to use that term, is going to be academic publications.
Right.
That's especially true of major grants and scholars. It's not, it takes a long time for research to get published. You all know this. So it generally doesn't happen over the course of the grant. So one thing we require of all of our grantees across all programs is a 1-year annual report where people talk about here's what we're doing, here's what went well, here's some unexpected challenges we ran into, here's how we handle them. And so it's, fairly simple. It's like just sharing things. And then I hope this is our reputation, but as a foundation, what we try to do is both of those reports and in our in-person convenings is when grantees are having challenges, we like to put them in conversation with other grantees or with foundation staff to think about how they might, react to those. For our institutional challenge grant program, that's a little bit different. Certainly academic publications result from that, but one of the things we found in our stock taking of that program is they tend to be slower because this is partnership research. And so oftentimes what grantees are producing from the start is documents, presentations, memos, things that actually help nonprofits and public agencies use research and make decisions. So we don't ask for those things, though. We ask people to talk about them in their annual reports, but we don't necessarily ask for those. I will say, one grant program that is not an open application program, but that we started during the first Trump administration and resurrected this year is a rapid response research grant program that is meant to bring researchers together with public agencies and nonprofits and policymakers to use a literature review to address urgent policy issues. And those are not meant to develop academic publications. These are like 6 to 9 month grants where people are very quickly trying to put work together to help folks who need information to make a decision about something or to try to get a particular policy passed. So those are very different grant mechanisms. And if any, I imagine we'll do it again next year. So if any of you do have an idea and think, oh my goodness, like I know this thing's about to take place next year, it would be a fit with your interest, and I'm interested in talking with you about it. That is one situation where, yes, please, connect with Kevin, send me an email, and let's have a conversation. That's a very long answer. Sorry, Kevin.
No, it was extremely helpful. Yeah. If anyone who's sitting on the call has any questions, we've gotten 1 or 2 trickling in, but please don't hesitate to message either me or Suzanne. Suzanne, do you have one for us?
Yeah, I see one in the chat from Rebecca. She asked, are health outcomes of interest?
So okay, so I'm hedging on this. Like normally as a foundation, our focus has not been in funding research on physical health because the NIH has done that, because there are other large research funders that do this. We have sometimes funded research on health. It is not a major focus, and next year, I'm not sure if we will. If that were the main focus of an application, that's one thing we're discussing right now because we're trying to think about ways to tighten the parameters a little bit more. So I'm going to hedge on that one and say we're not totally close to it, but we don't as often fund research in that area. Where there has certainly been a history of funding folks who do research on health is in our scholars program. In fact, this is true of major grants too. Like we funded a number of physicians in that program. So if you're thinking about applying for next year, especially for major grants, look at the application guidance that comes out in November. We have to meet with our board in October to think about some things. But I think especially for scholars, there will always be an openness to that.
Okay. Another question we have, it's from Chris Mills. So he's part of a team. Notre Dame's actually would be a sub-grantee, but the team has been invited to submit a full proposal, and he asked, are there benefits to applying now versus in the spring? For example, are there differences in expected amount of funding that might be given out in the November cycle compared to the spring cycle, or a difference in funding competitiveness?
Yeah. So first I'll back up and say, I started with the initial slide about the funding climate. We've seen an increased volume of applications, but we don't have increased funding, right? So things are as tight as they always have been. That said, the invitation rate for major grants has decreased significantly, right? So we used to invite roughly 15% of folks to submit full proposals. Since May, and Chris, I'm assuming your application, you must have submitted an LOI in May or August. Yeah, so congratulations for getting invited to submit a full proposal, because that invitation rate dropped to 8% in May, and we are still wrapping up August, and I'm guessing it was probably around 6%. So 5 to 6% for simply being invited to submit a full proposal. So because what we're trying to do is keep the numbers about the same for what is being considered for any given docket. So if you submit in November, it means your proposal will be under consideration competing against others for the June docket next year. And then if you submit it in April for the October docket of next year, and honestly, it doesn't matter because we're trying to keep the numbers about the same for the number of proposals competing against one another. So, if I would say if your team feels like, we're not quite ready and we don't have time pressure and there's more that we can do to strengthen this before April, then wait. But if you're ready to go now, then go ahead and submit it, because you've already made a huge hurdle. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you. Another question, do you look more negatively on a budget that is largely salary support? Are there any issues there versus, RAs, postdoc support, things like that?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. No. That we do ask our external reviewers to scrutinize the budget. Now, I will say, so when you apply for a major research grant, if you apply for an officer's research award, which is the one that's $50,000 or less, you submit budget materials at the time of application. When you apply for a major grant at the LOI stage, you submit a number, right? There's no budget materials. It's your best guess at what the grant might cost. And it's, sometimes people change it when they submit a full proposal. That's fine. But we do ask external reviewers to scrutinize that budget. It's something that when the reviews come back to us and proposals move forward in the process, internal staff look at as well. We have funded people where a lot of the grant is going towards staff, but if it's like, I have seen reviewers say, why are this many people working on this grant? Their salaries are huge. So much is going to the budget. And where people might ask questions, for example, is if you're doing any kind of partnership work or participatory research, and there's just gobs of the budget is going towards salaries and nothing or virtually nothing towards participant incentives. I've increasingly seen reviewers take issue with that. So, the thing about the budget justification document, because you submit one that's like all numbers in an Excel file, then you have your budget justification document. That is a really critical document where you explain the work that people are doing and you explain the rationale for your budget categories. And you can use that document to do a lot of valuable things. So I would say, as long as you offer a rationale for why a budget is structured the way it is, that's fine. I'll say the same thing about the narrative of your proposal. The other thing that we critique at the LOI stage, but across all proposals, is if there's not a rationale for really critical design decisions, that's something you don't want people making inference about, or assuming that you don't know, like you're just interviewing 5 people because whatever seems like 5 is the right number. Like, you want to have rationale for everything, essentially, is what I'm trying to say.
That's really helpful. One more question. You mentioned the percentage of LOIs invited to full proposals, but once a full proposal is invited, what's the percentage of those that usually get funded?
That's a good question. So it varies. For reducing inequality, it's generally anywhere from 18 to 25%. For the use of research evidence, it's about the same. There are so many fewer proposals that come in for the use of research evidence that sometimes when we get to our call where we're making decisions about what to recommend to the board, we have one URE proposal, right? So and there have only been 5 submitted. So it's the funding rates are all shaped by that. But generally for reducing inequality, it's 18 to 25%. So yeah, it's competitive. It's tough. Yeah.
One other question I have, so I work with a lot of faculty who are doing international work, and I'm curious if the work that, or if the project that they're working on has outcomes that, even though the work is taking place internationally, but the outcomes could significantly impact youth in the US, and those findings could maybe be used in the US or be you know what I'm trying to say, basically.
I do.
If there's some sort of impact in the research that's taking place, even though the work is taking place internationally, is that kind of project still open for funding, but not really? Okay.
No, I'll just be very straightforward. No. And the bar is just like so high now at the LOI stage for being invited to submit a full proposal. But no, I mean, I'm on funding panels a lot with other funders in the US. And I mean, Spencer is like the, one big funder we work with a lot that it will fund international work on education broadly conceived, but not us. I'm sorry.
Okay. No, that's good to know.
Yeah.
All right. I don't see any more
Other
questions in the chat.
questions?
Kevin, do you have any
Yeah.
other ones?
I think we have time. Does anyone have one more they can toss in? We got time for it. Or has the presentation just been so clear and comprehensive and efficient?
It better be. I do this often enough. I mean, I would tell, I would tell your faculty, your colleagues that we often give presentations at academic conferences, especially, where there are conferences where the work being presented is, likely in many ways to resonate with the work we fund. So, go to those presentations. It often is a good place too to connect with us, like, to have a short meeting or conversation. If any of you are going, or wait, yeah, you could be going to SRI this week. It's just right down the road in Chicago. So, Adam Cameron is there at SRI. I'm going to APAM next month. We go to ASA. There are a lot of different conferences we go to. So that, I mean, for our foundation and for others, that's a really good place to connect with people in person and have a conversation.
I think sort of related to that, we did have one question slide in right under the radar, right under the needle. And so the question is, how much technical detail do you want in the methods? And I might also add like maybe a little bit of a reframe. If you could maybe talk about what are the general, like, who is the audience of these external reviewers? Are they themselves social scientists? Are they more generalists?
Yep. So, I mean, obviously it depends on the stage of application. If we're talking about major grants between an LOI and a full proposal, but on average, you should be taking at least 2.5 to 3 pages of your LOI to talk about your research design, probably. And if you're doing quantitative analysis, you want to be very clear about what your sample is, very clear about what methods you're using. If you're doing quantitative analysis, we want to see some information about statistical power in the LOI. And if you're doing qualitative work, you want to provide enough information that, again, that you have a rationale for what people always are like, I'm going to do a focus group. And it's like, why? They don't have any reason why. And so you want to have a rationale for what you're doing. And it doesn't want to seem like it's ad hoc. You're tacking it on because you think you're supposed to. You want to elaborate on those things to the extent possible. So, technical information is often quite important in the research design, and especially, in the full proposal. And the more complicated your research design is, it's often helpful to include a table where you're really mapping things out so people can see what you're doing. What is off-putting is LOIs and proposals that are very jargony unnecessarily, and that use specific jargon without really explaining what they're talking about. But I will say, I mean, the reason why this matters at the LOI stage when internal staff review, and because given the volume of LOIs we receive, we are bringing in external people to help us read at that stage as well. You want to be, you're writing for a PhD audience, a general PhD audience at the LOI stage. So it's people who can understand what you're talking about for the most part. Now, when we go to the external review stage, we are looking for reviewers who ideally have both content and methodological expertise in what you're doing, or 2 to 3 reviewers who across all of them can cover the content and methodological work that you're doing in your work. So that, I mean, those people have more specific knowledge, and you can assume they also, we try to get people who understand what it means to have a large research grant. Like, we're doing lots of things so people can talk about not just the methods and the work that you're doing and its contribution to the field, but also the budgeting, the staffing, etc. So those folks have more expert knowledge in your area. And we, external reviews are incredibly important for us. We're always looking for external reviewers. So if you want to review, that is something you can email me about. Yeah.
All right. It looks like we did have one more. I think
Okay.
this will be the last one. One more question.
Sure.
How far out should a start date be listed in the LOI?
Oh, okay.
I know you had said maybe 10 to 15 months if it's above $50,000.
Yeah. Yes, that's right. Yeah. So,
Okay.
I mean, this is something you can always change,
Okay.
but I think there's a little table at the end of the application guidance that tells you if you're, if you submit a full proposal, like I just said, if you submit a full proposal in November, it's going up to the June board, and your start date should be July 1st or later. Now, and so we're about to have a board meeting in October. These are applications that came in April. And some people probably chose a November 1st start date if they're funded. I mean, if it matters for you, your start date can be then, but the money is not going to go out the door for a couple of months, right? It takes a little while to process award letters. So if that, that may be something to keep in mind, but it has to at least be after the board meeting for which it's being considered. But we have to ask people to change their start dates all the time.
Sure. And the grants typically last 3 years?
3 years. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And people are always getting no cost extension.
Yes,
I shouldn't say that, but the norm is for people to usually get one no cost extension.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Well, I think that's all the questions we have.
Great. Good.
So,
well, thanks for having me. This has been fun.
Yes. Thank you again, Jenny. This was extremely clarifying and really, really helpful. I've been taking notes. So hopefully I get an email or two from some of the folks who've been watching. If you have ideas that you're excited about and you want to get off the ground, let me know. Let Suzanne know, and we can get, some ideas starting to bundle together. And really grateful, Jenny, for you to take your time and sharing your expertise. And I hope we can continue this conversation maybe over some LOIs that are moving to the invitation stage,
That would be
like some of the
great.
other people who have been participating today. So thank you again.
Sure.
As a reminder, the recording will be posted up early next week, and I will follow up with everyone who registered with some of the great resources that Jenny shared. So thank you again, everyone. Have a great rest of your Friday, and stay tuned for the next webinar from the Franco Institute in a couple weeks.